Sarah. Welcome back to the Sisterhood, sister.
Hi, friends. This is like the best thing that could have happened on a random Tuesday in the summer. It's just to hang out with you guys.
Yeah.
No, and it's so true. Because we're friends in real life, and that's always like so fun when we get to hop on here with an old friend. It's the best. Even though we're miles apart, we feel so close.
I know. Although I wish we were in person, but we are definitely stretched miles apart.
Well, Sarah, you made a big move since we've seen you last in person.
Yes. We had been in Atlanta for so long. And then we moved to Tennessee, to just outside of Chattanooga, which is kind of the southeast corner, the bottom of it. And moved on to my parents, like next door to their farm. And we've just become farm people, horses and cats. I'm not ready to go into like goats and chickens yet, but Rory is pressuring me, but I'm not saying yes to that right now.
Yeah. Well, I watch your Instagram feed and I think, what is going on in her life right now?
I know.
She's like got the horse thing.
Yes.
It just feels very magical.
It is. It doesn't get old. Like I literally just said again today, like we were having a conversation. I just had to stop and look at my window and I just see this like horse and I'm like, it just doesn't get old. They're just so pretty. And the view is just so pretty. It really is magical.
Well, that's lovely.
I know.
That is lovely. But that's not how your life has always felt.
No.
Let's normalize that life isn't just magical for you all the time. And you might have those kitchen window moments, but that doesn't mean it's like that 24/7.
Oh, no.
And that is one thing I appreciate about you is that you bring your whole self and your whole life to your listeners on your podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family and your podcast, and then we will dive into the topic for the day.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So the podcast is called Surviving Sarah. And it really is because I have been surviving myself all these years. And I thought, okay, how can I help I feel like we all need help in like work and in relationships and our faith and ourselves. And so basically I just have people on the show because I'm like, what am I dealing with? What am I struggling with? What do I need some free counseling with? Let's have some people on that can just help me out. So it's just a fun, I feel like the episodes are, we kind of go deep sometimes, always vulnerable, always just trying to survive where we are. And so that's Surviving Sarah. And then I'm married to Scott and we have 2 middle school girls too, which is hard to believe that they're both in middle school, but Sinclair is 8th grade and Rory is 6th grade. And so I spend a lot of times I'm a writer and an editor and obviously the podcast. So kind of work from home. And like you said, it seems very magical, but I can look out the window and I see lots of piles of horse poop everywhere. And so that's not really the magical part of that, or me yelling at my kids to have them pick up said horse poop and they don't, every day. So, so there are some not so magical moments, but that's in a snapshot where I am and what I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so appropriate and metaphorical to this book that you've written, and also just motherhood, right? Like that is motherhood. Yes. It's like the kitchen window moments and the horse poop in the front yard, like where we're like, okay, we just like stepped in that all over and it's all over everything. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about where this idea came from of kind of raising yourself as a mom and how you have really just taken a deep dive into that with this new book.
Yes. Well, it didn't take long before I realized that raising kids was less about actually raising kids and more about raising ourselves. It was really more about what it was doing to me, how I was becoming, how I was growing. It revealed so much to me about myself, my own insecurities, my own fears, my own tendencies towards perfectionism, control, all of these things that it was revealing. And for the first few years of raising my girls, it's like I was just fighting it because I was like, oh, surely like I can figure this out. Like, surely there's like this magic formula, A plus B equals C. You just read these books and then your kids are going to turn out just fine. And so I fought that, like, I knew that was not true very early on, but I kept fighting that. And so that's when I started realizing going, okay, I am seeing a lot about myself. and there's a lot of room for growth. And these girls are actually the highlighter. They are the mirror, if you will. And I'm looking at myself and going, if I want my girls to be this, or if I want them to believe this, then I want this for myself too. I know all of us have some moment where we look at our kids and we say something and we immediately go, oh, do I think that? Do I believe that? Would I take my own advice? And it was those kind of things that really just started, I don't know, it was just blaring at me. There were just things about courage and authenticity and kindness and gratitude, things over and over again that I just really started noticing and realizing, I think I need to do a little work on myself. And the more work I did on myself in some of these things, I think the better I loved the people around me. It became less about controlling them to have this certain outcome and just more about me becoming a better version of myself.
Well, I think everybody can relate to that. And it feels a little refreshing to me because I think sometimes in Christian circles, when we talk about motherhood, we are talking about losing ourselves and pouring ourselves out. And you're not saying that.
Right.
You are talking about serving your kids, but you're visible. You don't go invisible in the process, and you give yourself enough space to consider, where are my growth spurts happening right now? And I'm watching my kids grow, and we talk about taking our kids to the pediatrician and marking their growth in all these different developmental areas, but we never, well, I shouldn't say we never, I don't know, maybe some people do. I often don't look at myself and say, okay, this is where I'm having some growth spurts. Can you give us a story or an insight into a time when you felt like, oh, wow, something's going on here and I need to pay attention to it and I need to be a little intentional?
Yeah. Well, one of the things as you were talking, that one of the biggest things that I think of is I can be really critical and judgmental towards myself. I feel like I'm, seeing the best in other people and I'm cheering them on. And, if a friend came to me and said, I just feel this way, or I don't think I'm that great, or I feel like, and I'm like, I would not respond with you. You're right. You're pretty awful. Yet that's how I speak to myself. I'm, any mistake I make, I'm always hyper critical of that. I can't believe you did that. Who are you? And so I started seeing that in motherhood because I have one of my girls, it happens with both of them, but one of them in particular is just, well, if anything happens, she'll be like, oh, I'm the worst kid in the world. She just goes straight shame. I am the worst. There's nothing good about me. And she's been doing that since early on. And it's not, and I've never, scolded her in that way. It's just, I think sometimes I remember hearing this from someone that talked about that strong-willed kids tend to carry more shame than other kids because they're the ones bumping up against the line all the time. And so I think she internalized, maybe getting in trouble or being corrected as, I am this bad kid. So I started going, gosh, I need to correct this. It's one thing to feel guilt for doing something if you did something wrong, but we all make mistakes. Even if it was wrong or if it was just a simple typo, we all make mistakes. Doesn't change your, identity, your value, your worth. And so I started saying to my girls, be kind to yourself. We all make mistakes. Be kind to yourself. Anything that happened. Be kind to yourself. Don't say that. Don't talk to yourself like that. Talk to yourself the way you talk to a friend. What would you say if your friend did this? What would you say? And I was coaching them in that. But at the same time, that's when I was going, I've got to coach myself in that. I have to start changing that dialogue that's inside my head. That's a growth. That's a milestone that I need to reach. I need to not let the muscle memory of the first reflexes, you are the worst. It needs to change to, it's okay. You made a mistake. Not a big deal. Let's move on. And so I remember, our friend, Sissy Goff, she was on the show for the first time and I misspelled her name on all the promotional material. And I criticized myself up and down for literally just misspelling her name. And so that was during that season of learning, of trying to correct. That was one of those highlighting moments of going, oh, this can't be. You wouldn't tell your daughters to react that way about a mistake they made. And so when years later, I mean, like fast forward, 7 years later from learning that phrase, like practicing that phrase, I did it again, like misspelled a guest name on all the promotional materials. And when she corrected me on it, my first thought was not, "Ugh, you are the worst." It was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'll correct that. We'll fix it." Like not once did it cross my mind that it needed to inform my identity, that mistake. And so that's where I go, gosh, that is growth. That is a milestone. That's one of the biggest ones for me, because that inner critic can be so loud and it's so controlling and it's so demanding, that to be to the point where I can check that, and that's not even the first thought, that's a huge growth moment for me that has come through raising kids.
Well, and I just think about how there's no place where the stakes are higher than parenthood, motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And because we just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to screw up my kids. I'm going to make these mistakes that have, these consequences that just live on forever. And they're going to be in therapy one day about these. And it just feels like the stakes are so high. And so what are some ways that you specifically just in that place of mothering where you do feel like I really could screw my children up and this is really hard. And whether it's anger or words that were spoken in anger, or maybe it was just like a repetitive behavior that you've adopted from your own family that you don't even realize you're doing. But, even just practically, like, how do you deal with that in those moments where, and maybe a part of it is true that there are some unhealthy patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think first things for me, I carry a lot of fear with parenting. I think that has to be one of the biggest characteristics of parenting, is just fear. Fear that they're like, if I do this or if they do this, are they going to be in jail at like 13? Like, right? Or are they going to are they going to be slobs? Like literally today, I pull up next to a car and I look in the back seat and it is just full of like clothes and like Chick-fil-A bags. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is what my kid's back seat of their car is going to look like one day. Like there's probably dead animals in there. And literally that fear, like if I don't correct this in them, what are they going to become? And so I feel like it's addressing the fear. I've learned, I've been practicing and I'm learning to not, fear is not bad. Fear is an emotion, and it is emotion that sometimes protects us, right? There's legitimate times to be afraid. And so when I feel afraid, and this is what I learned from raising my girls because of coaching them with fear, but going, okay, well, pay attention. Okay. You feel afraid. Well, why do you feel afraid? Is this a worthy reason to are you literally going to someone's going to attack you right now? Or are you just feeling nervous because it's a new situation? You're not really sure what's coming, like talking myself through those things. And so, especially when it comes to fears about what is going to happen to our kids, I have to coach myself through that and get curious about the fear that I have. And then try to not let it drive the car. Try to let it go. Okay, you are here, and that is fine for me to feel afraid at times, but it doesn't need to make my decisions for me. And that is a big learning curve. And then as far as, the other things that might be valid, that going, I'm not bringing my best self to the table. I think there's a level of just paying attention and getting curious and going, why do I do that? Why is it that every time my mom says this to me about my parenting or my children, this comes out, like what is going on? I think the more curious I became about those kind of things, the more aware I became of it. Then the more aware I am of it, the more I'm able to kind of, well, what would look different in this situation? If I always yell, that's my go-to. Why am I yelling? What is it triggering up in me? I've never been a yeller before, but this is making me yell at my kids all the time. What's going on in me? And then it's that being curious and paying attention and going, maybe I'm actually just tired. Maybe I'm hungry. Maybe I'm stressed because of something else, and they're catching me at the wrong moment. But I think the more we can work to just pay attention to those things, I think the more we can work through them to find our better self or to react in a better way to our kids, whatever it might be.
I was just talking to a friend this week who has kids younger than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about anger. And I was telling her that the first time I really, really felt angry in my life had to do with my kids.
Yes.
When my second baby was born, and I really did not want the first one to wake her up during nap time. And so we were laughing about just this, don't you dare do that, because it will wake up the baby. And I'm so exhausted. I'm unraveling. So motherhood, it gets us in touch with some things sometimes that we have never experienced before. So some of them are very good things,
right?
Like the protection we have for our children, the love we have for them. It's usually this supernatural love that we've never experienced, even if we've loved someone else very much until we've had children. But then there's these negative things too, that it, like you said, the highlighter, but it's almost like the drill too. It goes deep into the core of who we are. And you talk in your book about your most authentic self. Can you talk about what that means and how motherhood draws out some things that are new for us? And does that mean that I'm authentically angry? Like I'm an angry person because I'm experiencing this for the first time through motherhood? Or is it just revealing more of the totality of who I am?
Yeah. Well, and I think, first of all, that the anger, it's like, no, that's just a feeling. Like, it doesn't make you an angry mom because you experience anger. It's one of those where it's like, you're just, for whatever reason, they're pushing that button, and this is the feeling, this is the emotion that is coming out. So that emotion is not bad, but we have to figure out, is that the best, like, what am I doing with that anger? Right. I can feel angry, but if I'm like throwing, a shoe at somebody, there's a problem going on. And for motherhood, I felt like I was trying to be someone. I had this picture in my head of what a mother was supposed to be, and that you're supposed to do all these things. You're supposed to want to snuggle your children in the bed on a Saturday morning. You're supposed to want to always play like Barbies with them. You're supposed to want to, like, all the things. You could go on and on and on. And some people actually do like to do those things, and some people don't like to do those things. And I think I just kept thinking, oh, this is the image of what a good mom looks like, and this is what she is supposed to do. But my personality was like, well, I really want to drink my coffee by myself, like, before I talk to anybody. Like, and that's not a bad thing, but I had to wrestle with some of those things. And so I feel like I started learning, I would look at my girls and tell them to tell the truth on things. Yet I was going, am I telling the truth about who I am? Am I pretending more and trying to be someone that I think everybody wants me to be? And so I think motherhood really helped me to go, well, then who am I really? Like, it down to the little things. I started by just trying to figure out, well, do you like being in bed on a Saturday morning with your children? No, I don't. Do you like, walking the dog on a leash? No, I don't. Get out of here. I'm not going to walk you, like all those kind of things. How do I like my eggs? Like, such little things. But I feel like over the years, you just kind of lost sight of who you are, because you're constantly working for everybody else and making sure that all your people are taken care of. And you're kind of the bottom of the totem pole. And so then you just kind of forget who you are. And I think that was kind of the process. It started little, and then you started tackling big things. Like, well, what do I really believe about this? Where do I really stand on this issue? What do I really think? And the more that I began to just go, this is me. Like, we're all different. And that's such a beautiful thing. We don't have to be all the same. That was when I started to tackle those big things, and then find a little bit of courage to voice them out loud to the people around me. And then, of course, in the nature of what the three of us do, you say it out loud on a microphone somewhere or in a book somewhere. But I think that's where it started. Was I was looking at my girls, telling them to tell the truth. And it was going, well, who am I really? And I don't know about you guys. I feel like I'm always trying to figure out my kids. That's why we're all fascinated with temperaments and the Enneagram. We want to figure them out because we want to, like, understand them more. And we want them to be able to figure out who they are and to tell the truth about who they are and feel comfortable in our own homes with who they are. And a lot of that, I think, begins with us, like, starting to be comfortable with who we are and figuring that out and speaking that out.
what would you say? How do you balance saying, okay, this is who I am, and I would like to be different in this area? Like the kind of the growth element.
Yes.
Like there are a lot of things that I know are true about me, but I don't necessarily like that. That's my natural bent.
Yes. Well, I think there's for so many years, and I hate even admitting this, I always lived with a fixed mindset about everything. Like even down to like, oh, well, I'm not a math person. I'm a words person. Well, who says so? Like maybe I actually am a math person. I just never learned it the right way when I was, or a way that made sense to me. Those kind of things. And when Sinclair was in 6th grade, she had a science teacher who was all about growth mindset. Like everything was growth mindset. Like, and then she would take a test and you had the opportunity to take that test, look at what you missed and rework it and give it back. And she'd give you half credit. She's like, there's always room for growth, always room to learn something. And I really started thinking about that in regards to how I viewed myself and how I viewed my kids. Did I view my kids with a fixed mindset? Like, oh, they have always been hard. They have always been trouble. Like this is who they are. I am always this thing. Like, this is it. Like, I guess I am just like a lazy person or whatever it is that you're going, I need to improve this area of my life. I am just this person. That's just it. That's a fixed approach to how we view ourselves and how we view others. And so I think there's always room for growth. Like, yes, there's like, there's certain temperaments. Like I like, an element of I need some alone time to recharge. Like that's kind of like, I may never change. I may never need like a crowd of 100 people to recharge, but there's probably things in my life where I'm like, oh, I'm, like health stuff, like, oh, I really do. Like, I'd rather just eat like chips and queso every day. Well, probably can't, like I need to grow in that area that I'm not eating chips and queso every day. But I think that's when we approach ourselves with there's always room for growth. I think that it changes our mind about that to where we now go, oh, like this is an area I want to improve on. And if I give some intentionality behind it, if I think about it some, if I journal about it, if I read some about it, do a little bit of work, I do think you will see growth in that because that's what happens when we have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. I love this conversation so much. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, it gets to that. I mean, I'm thinking about being my authentic self, saying, okay, this is who I am. Thinking, okay, but I want to be more this way. Mm-hmm. And then being realistic about the how I'm going to get closer to that, even though I may not be the person like you that's going to be energized by being in a huge crowd.
Right.
I may want to say, but I do want to be more social than I have been the last year and a half during COVID.
Right.
So how can I take that next step, which is what we say here at the Sisterhood? How do I take that next step so I'm moving in that direction? And I think Krista's really good at promoting the growth mindset. I tend to be more of a perfectionist where I think if I can't do it, if the end result isn't going to look like I had in my mind and it's not going to be perfect in my definition of perfect, then why even try?
Yep.
And so I think there is some personality that plays into that too, where some of us have to work harder at the growth mindset than others.
Yep. Absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, that's where it goes. Pick one thing. What is your next step? Like, what is one thing that because there is not a single one of us, no one listening to this that is like, yeah, I have fully arrived and I feel pretty good that I'm pretty awesome and I don't need to grow at all. Like all of us could pinpoint some area in our life. And it might even be like, I need more fun in my life. Like, we spend a lot of energy, a lot of time and a lot of money making sure our kids have fun. And we never think about ourselves having fun. So maybe it's like, I need to grow in just having more play in my life that I enjoy. It's okay. Well, what's the next step? You know what? I'm going to, plant a garden, or I'm going to invite a friend and we're going to go walk every Friday, or I'm going to like just one little thing. It doesn't have to be like this huge thing, but I think when you do those kind of things over time, anything that you do over time is going to build and it's going to grow. And I think you would see that with the smallest of step.
I've been doing just so much reading just on coaching, on my coaching materials, and always just working at how I can be a better coach to people. And one of the things I was reading the other day was how most of us live from our subconscious mindset. And so we're just on autopilot and we don't even really think about why we're doing what we're doing. And that's actually kind of the whole point of coaching, is you bring everything to the front of the conscious mindset. And so you're actually making more decisions that align with where you want to go instead of being on that autopilot mode. And I was also thinking about, when you were talking, Sarah, about that book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Have you read that?
No.
It's about it's the hospice nurse from Australia who wrote this book that she just kept hearing the same regrets over and over and over again. And one of them was that the 5th one was that they wish they would have allowed themselves to be happier. And another one was they wish they would have lived according to more of what they wanted and who they are, rather than what they thought they should do, or someone else's definition of what they should do. Amen. And I feel like you hit on all those things that really at the end of our life, you know, we have these choices along the way of how we can live. And so are we going to be authentic to ourselves and who we are, and not dismissing the growth mindset at all, because I'm a proponent of that, but really recognizing who we are and then kind of allowing ourselves to have joy in that, and even be like happy about, because I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves, especially as moms, that we actually forget to like I can actually be happy right now, even in the imperfection, even in the parts that are imperfect in me. And I can have that growth mindset and start bringing all those things to the conscious front and really planning my life accordingly of where I want to go. Yes. And but I feel like in motherhood, more than any other area, it's been my experience, and you can tell me if it's yours, but more than any other area, I feel like I put so much pressure on myself, or have in the past. I'm starting to let go of that, but you know, really have in the past, that it's just sometimes hard to do all those things, to be your authentic self and to allow yourself to be happy. And, you know, just, have you found that to be true, that that's just, it's like a hotbed area that maybe in other areas you can do that, but I find in mothering, it's the most challenging.
Well, and it's, I think as we carry, you said it, so much pressure. So then there's just, you kind of feel like the stakes are so high. Like, do I have time to like think about this? But I've noticed, and you guys may feel this way too, turning 40, I'm now into my 40s, but there was a level of midlife where you just go, I am so tired. Like, I am just tired of not being me. And so even if it comes to my girls and we're dealing with something, I'm tired of trying to say the right thing, or like, I feel like I'm supposed to be this way or respond. Like, obviously I want to respond in kindness, but there's sometimes where I just don't. And when I don't, I want to be the kind of person that can own when I don't. And that in itself is growth for me. And that in itself is teachable moment for my children as well, because guess what? You're not going to always respond the way you're supposed to respond. And so in those things where we are like feeling that pressure and feeling tired, I don't know. I think for me, it's just going, okay, the more that I'm like, I was more tired when I was striving to be someone I wasn't than I am at, well, this is who I am. And I'm not going to always get it right. And like I said, I'm going to mess up and I'm going to respond poorly at times. Or even like, you know, like if like cussing in front of my kids at times, that sounds so, people are like, oh my gosh, I've canceled her. She's out. But I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I cuss and it's just going to be okay. Like I tell my girls, like, I'm like, you're not so precious. You can handle it. Like, and they're like, I know, like I hear it at middle school all day long. It's fine. Like, you know, they're so funny, but there's just elements of allowing for me, there's less pressure when I allow myself just to kind of work some of this stuff out. Even though it might be messy and I might fumble around and I may owe a lot more apologies along the way than if I was really striving to be this perfect person in front of my children all the time. I don't know if that answered what you're asking now that I'm like talking it out. I may have just talked to you in a circle, but that's how, I don't know. It just feels like the more I stepped into who I am, it was less, I felt less pressure in that regards.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if some of it's age too. I mean, obviously as our kids are getting older and the more we've mothered, we're also older.
Yes.
And maturity of just understanding, like, I'm not going to break them.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And there was somebody, Krista, I think who we had on the podcast, who said, your kids are going to have to go to therapy because of something you said or did.
Right.
And the
It's
sooner
bound
you
to
can
happen.
come to terms with that, then the more freedom you'll feel. And that was very freeing for me to just say, okay, that's just going to be my baseline. I'm just going to expect that that's true. And then, so I'm going to mess up. But then what is my response? Like you said, the forgiveness factor, I think, is really heavy. And recognizing that we are coaching our children to be the healthiest adults possible.
Right.
And so when I'm operating out of my unhealth, what I'm coaching them to do is to look and see, this is what an adult is supposed to do. This is how an adult is supposed to behave. I'm modeling poor behavior as far as health-wise.
Right.
Even if the behavior is nice, if I'm stuffing my emotions or I'm not taking care of myself, but it's polite on the outside, the older they get, the more they're going to see that and recognize that. Or in 20 years, they're going to reflect on that.
Yeah.
So I think to operate out of our healthiest selves, which means we're going to mess up, but then we're also going to quickly ask for forgiveness and extend forgiveness. That feels like growth to me, that we're growing together as a family and saying, none of us are perfect. That doesn't mean we don't try to do the right thing the first time around, but we're not going to always achieve that. And
well, I think that's where those things where, like, for me, I can look back at even how I was raised or my personality and conflict, like what we're describing feels like conflict to me. And I always was like, I don't want any conflict. Like if there's conflict, then I think I've done something wrong, when the reality is conflict just, it exists. Like you can't get away from it. And raising kids, I mean, if you have more than one child, your house is probably full of conflict and they're just always at it. And that has definitely taught me that this is about, we're all just humans together living in close quarters. Things are going to happen. So if I'm always putting all this pressure on me to respond the way that I think I'm supposed to respond all the time, when sometimes I'm just tired and I'm going to respond because I'm tired, it doesn't make it right. It just means I'm going to recognize it and go, I'm so sorry that I didn't bring my best self to the table. Like, I'm tired. I'm sorry. And that is handling conflict a lot better than we're just going to keep performing and trying to do all the right things so that we never face a bump like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sarah, in your book, I want us to also talk about, you talk about there's three kind of distinct things that we can be operating in at any one time: purpose, work, and calling, and how those are, kind of happening simultaneously. What makes them unique? Like what makes them distinct, and how do we as moms, what does that look like for us?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of tension around those words. For me, I grew up in the 90s and there was a lot of talk, and you guys probably did too, a lot of talk about purpose and that you had to find your purpose in life. And so to me, it felt like there was this one avenue for me that I needed to do because that was my purpose. And so I started, but then like I worked for a minor league baseball team out of college. But then you're going, well, gosh, I was also, raised in like, the Christian church, and was going, well, I mean, but is baseball, like, is that my purpose? Like, because isn't it like purpose supposed to be like, leading people to Jesus? That sounds more purposeful than like doing the chicken dance on the dugout, And so I just wrestled with so much of that. And then you throw in this whole thing. So to me, and this might just be me and maybe the era that I grew up in, but all of a sudden purpose became like, okay, well, I thought purpose was what you're supposed to do with your life. Well, what am I supposed to do with I'm supposed to like pay bills. So then I started tying that to work. And then in the Christian circles, you started hearing the word calling. Well, I was called to do this. I was called to ministry. I was called to this job. I was called to this thing. And I think, well, I like working for this church, but I never got like a phone call from God that was like, you're supposed to do this. Like, is that what you're talking about? Like, what is going on here with that word calling? And so I think for me, there's just a lot of pressure that gets put on what we do and who we are on with those words. When the truth is we all have to work in some sense. Like I have bills that I have to pay, and I may not always like my work. I may not be passionate about my work. It may not be my ultimate purpose in life. But I think when we try to tie our purpose and if we think we have a calling to our work, a lot of times we're going to leave feeling really down because we're going to put all this pressure on it. And then all of a sudden, if that work falls apart, if we face a sense of rejection in that work, if we can no longer do that job for some reason, then we're left feeling like, well, then what? Who am I? And I was supposed to be this thing. And a lot of people, I write about this in the book, but we tie that word calling to motherhood. Well, I was called to be a mother. Well, what happens if someone was called to be a mother and then never had children? Like, does that mean they were never called to be a mother? Like there's just, and I understand the use of that word. I think it's a validating word. We're trying to elevate because we see how important the role of motherhood is, but it's not something I do. It's something I am. I am a mom. Like that is who I am. But that is very different than what I do. You know, like I have to do things for work that is not necessarily tied to my motherhood. And so I do think for me, kind of pulling those words apart and not putting so much pressure, knowing I have to work. It is a privilege if you don't have to work. And I recognize that even the work that I get to do there's a whole lot of privilege wrapped up in that. But then I've really been trying to reframe purpose and tying, and I've been liking the word like meaningful. This is something meaningful that I do. Versus this is my purpose, that this is what I've got to figure out. I don't know if you guys read or listen to Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Big Magic.
Yeah, sometimes I do.
And I heard her on an interview because I think she used to really preach passion and purpose. And then she really just changed her mind in the last few years about that. And she said, you know, she's like, for me, it felt very extraordinary. Like I'm chasing this big passion. I'm here for a reason that's bigger than anything that I can imagine. And she said, and I started realizing maybe my purpose was just so much smaller, but still so profound. Like she talked about, like she was walking past a painter and he was on a tall ladder and the ladder was wobbly. And so she's like, I just got really nervous for him that he was going to fall. And I walked behind him and I held the ladder. He didn't even know I was there. And I held the ladder for 40 minutes. And then when I saw that he was coming down, I just walked away. And she's like, what if my whole purpose in life was to hold that ladder so he did not fall and break his neck? Like I fulfilled my purpose in life. And there's something about that mentality to me that felt so freeing to go, it doesn't have to be a big thing that we're chasing after. It might be your purpose in life is to, you know, just to show up and you're just doing this thing. Like it doesn't have to be so much pressure. And so I'm sure there's some of that is just my own upbringing with how, you know, I navigated all those things with those 3 words. But I think that those 3 words, there's a lot of tension around it, and tension isn't bad. It's just something that has to be managed.
It reminds me, have you ever seen that old movie with Steve Martin called The Jerk?
Yes.
Was that the one? And is that the one where he's like, is this my purpose? And he's like,
yes.
You know, oh my gosh, it's seriously the funniest thing ever, where he's like, you know, because he's just finding all these things. He's like, is this my purpose? Is this my purpose? And it kind of is the same thing, right? Like half the time we're doing the same thing. We're like, well, is this my purpose? Or is this my purpose? Like, we don't know. We're just wandering around wondering, you know, if this is it. And then I think also it lends itself to feeling like we've missed the boat.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, well, I must have missed my purpose because all of these things I'm doing just don't feel that special or that unique or that whatever. Right. And so somehow we've missed it. But I think in redefining that, I really like that, because I think that redefinition just puts a different light on it, and it just allows it to be more everyday and normal, which is what our lives are anyway, especially as moms.
Right. When I think about Alex and all of her, you know, loving your actual neighbor and all, like, what a great purpose that you exist just to like show up, and you're just going to show up and you're going to love the people around you, and you're going to love the people who are next door. You're going to love these people. That has purpose and meaning as well. I think that's why I like that word meaning or meaningful so much more, because that really, to me, broadens it more than purpose feels very specific. And but even down to just loving, like, I'm just going to show up and I just want to be a good human to the people next to me. That's meaningful and that's purposeful.
Yeah. And sometimes when we break it down into smaller bite-sized time elements as well, instead of saying like, what's my purpose for life?
Yes.
But saying, what's my purpose today?
Yeah.
What's my purpose in this next hour? So we're having a little bit of a COVID quarantine situation in our house right now. And so my plans for the next week have shifted, and I am trying to see it as an opportunity to say, okay, so what can I do with my days and my time right now while I'm at home? I've canceled things that are happening outside the home. And what can I do? And you mentioned loving my actual neighbor. We got a note on our on our door from a man who's very interested in a concrete company we used recently for a project we had outside.
Yeah.
And you could tell by the handwriting that he was probably older. And I called him and I put him on speaker last night. And for half an hour, he talked. I maybe said 3 words about his concrete project. And my husband kept coming in the room looking at me like, he's still talking. I'm like, yeah, never met him. Still talking. But I felt completely like I was living into my moment at that time, because I thought I really can't go anywhere. He needs somebody to talk to. I'm never probably going to meet him. And it felt really oddly fulfilling to sit at my desk and have my phone on speaker and look at Facebook while he was talking, because he didn't know I was doing that.
Right.
So I think in motherhood, I want people to hear that sometimes we think of it's good to have the end in mind. Like, will my child go to jail?
Yes.
Will my child have a healthy marriage? Like, those are good, big picture things, but also to remember that when we wake up in the morning, it's okay if we have a sick kid at home to say, it's my purpose today is to make sure that this child is taken care of in whatever little small ways that needs to happen. So it's good. I feel like it's very applicable what you're saying to my actual life in this actual moment.
Oh my goodness. See, you just like made that little man's day, probably, that he had somebody that needed to listen to all his words.
Yes. And he had a lot of them. And I think probably that's why they came spilling out, because I don't know that he has anyone to spill them to.
Right.
Okay. Sarah, before we go, what last words would you say if you were to look back to yourself as you were first becoming a mom, that you wish you had known, that you know now as you've grown yourself? What would your grown motherhood self say to the brand new mom as she's holding her baby?
I feel like one of the biggest things that I wish that I had learned earlier, understood earlier, was just you're raising humans. And that's a beautiful thing. Like a human who gets tired, who gets hungry, who gets happy, who feels like these emotions that our children feel. And they're just like you. But except they're in these like tiny little bodies, and they don't have near as much development as I have to know when it's appropriate to cry about something, or to, how to feel about something, or when to say something. And I feel like if I had just gone back and said like, oh, look, she's just hungry. Like, she's not trying to like attack your ecosystem with her screams. Like, she is just a tiny little human. And it's a beautiful thing being human, because there's just so many parts of being human that I think I never thought about. The physiological, just like the fears and the anxiety, what all that is. I feel like I've just grown so much, and I've helped myself in all that, that I wish that I had that perspective when they were itty bitties and I was a new mom.
Yeah, that's a good word. Well, Sarah, we are so excited about your new book, and we will be linking to it in the show notes. And it's just been such a fun thing for us to watch it go from beginning to end, beginning to completion, from literally that first Genesis moment of, I think I'm supposed to write this book.
Yes, I know. I mean, you guys hold such a special place to me. I was at the sisterhood retreat and working on like, well, how do I put together this book proposal? Where do I find the time to write any of the words? And you all just came alongside me. So it's very meaningful to me to have you all along the journey.
Well, we are thrilled for the world that it gets to
Mhm.
receive this book. And so we want to encourage everyone to go and pick it up.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being here, Sarah.
Love you guys.
Okay. Love you too. Bye.
Bye.